Hi, today we're going to take a look at an LED emergency light from Firefly. Now let me start by apologizing if my audio isn't too good. It's raining right now. Hopefully once I, edit my video it will be okay, but if it's not, I apologize. Now if you've ever been inside a business or in a fire exit or pretty much any commercial premises, you've probably seen these around or something that looks similar. You may see the older style ones where they have like a pole coming up and then like rabbit ears that can move around. This one is a more modern style, and they're very common in the commercial world, in fire exits and so on. Now this is basically the same thing, but it's a more modern version. It uses LEDs instead of halogen bulbs or CFLs or other high wattage bulbs. LEDs are a lot more power efficient, meaning they can run for more hours, or they can use a smaller battery and be made cheaper, things like that. So LED is the way of the future for these emergency lights. Now if you haven't seen one of these in action before, they basically always stay plugged into the AC power, either plugged into a socket or hardwired in. And then when there's a power cut, which we'll simulate, the lights come on automatically. So for instance, if it's in a fire exit, most of the time it will look like this, and the battery will just stay there fully charged, and it will just keep topping up the battery to make sure it's level. And then as soon as the power cut comes, it comes on automatically, and then people can safely exit the building because there's still lighting in those dark areas. You also find them in shopping malls and places like that, where again you need to make sure there's light, so that if there's a brownout or a blackout, that people can still safely see where they're going. Now let me start with my first complaint about this Firefly light. The plug. When you plug it in, it's loose. And it's not just on this socket. I've tried it on the wall socket, I've tried it on Omni extension leads, various different extension leads, and it's the same thing. This one is just loose. Now of course I can bend these pins outwards, and I did that and it does help a bit, but it still doesn't work great. And sometimes I experience this and it drives me crazy. Like, how hard is it to get this right, just to make sure that it's actually a secure fit? Now of course that will be okay, but it's not. I mean, look, let's say that was the thing. See, now if we take a look at the box, its input voltage is 230 volts, 60 hertz. So you couldn't use this in a lot of other countries because they either use 50 hertz or 110 or 100. So it's really only good for here in the Philippines and maybe a select few other countries. Each LED is 3 watts, so that's a total of 6 watts of light, and that's quite a lot of power, 6 watts. And inside they have a 6 volt, 4.5 amp hour lead acid battery, which is pretty much a standard for these kind of lights, and it's very easy to buy replacement batteries in pretty much every hardware store. It says the charging time is 24 hours and that you can get a duration of 3 hours of light. Now personally I would like to see a switch here so that I can switch 1 bulb on or 2 bulbs, depending on how much light I need. Or if I know there's going to be a brownout for a long time, I might prefer to turn one off so I can get 6 hours of less light, because 3 watts is still a lot of light. I'm not sure they need to be 6 watts total of light. Inside the box they also include some screws and tocks or raw plugs, depending on what you call them, which I like because that makes it easier to hang it without having to hunt for the right screws. Although confusingly, I don't see any mounting holes on the back here, which has me kind of stumped, to be honest. I'm really not sure how I'm meant to mount this. So if you have an idea, please put it in the comment section below, because I'm looking at this and I opened it up and I still can't work out how I'm meant to mount it with these 2 screws. So yeah, I'm not sure about that. On the bottom you have a charge light which will come on when it's plugged into AC. You have an on button which lets you turn it on even if it's currently plugged into AC. You have an off button and then a test button, and the test button will allow you to test it when it's plugged into the AC power. Just press that test button and it will show whether it's still working or not by turning on these lights. Now I really hate these buttons because they're very hard to push. You can do it by hand, but really it's easier to poke something into the holes. It just seems kind of difficult, especially imagine if you installed say 100 of these in a commercial building. It would be such a hassle testing these compared to other ones which have easy to push buttons. So again, I'm not a fan of the buttons, but it's not the end of the world. So I'll bring the camera closer and we'll take a look inside this thing. So let's take a closer look at this light. First of all, let's have a look at the actual LEDs. You can see there's a single LED in there, single LED in here, and a completely flat and transparent lens. I don't know if that's plastic or glass, it feels like plastic. And the problem with these is they pretty much act like spotlights. They point to one direction, they don't scatter the light evenly. The next thing you'll notice is where the charge cable goes in. Look at this, they couldn't even get the plastic to be neat. That doesn't really inspire confidence when you see that. And all of these grubby marks, that's not where I've had it and I've put those on there. It really did come, a little bit grubby, so not great. Now it's relatively simple to open open this thing up. There are just these tabs on the side and the top. All you have to do is push them in and kind of coerce it out. So I'll do that now. Here's one side. I am being a little bit rough on this, but you can take it easier, and there you go, it just pops off like that. And now we're inside, and you can see there is a Firefly branded battery inside, 6 volts 4.5 amp hour, which is what's stated on the box, and that pretty much takes up most of the space inside here. And something else you'll notice is this transformer here. It's actually a pretty hefty transformer, so that's obviously dropping the mains voltage down to something more workable, and I assume converting it to DC for our battery charging. I'll zoom in on the charging board so you can have a closer look. So you can see our mains comes in here, goes into our transformer. The transformer then outputs over here to the main board, and then our battery connects to the main board using these sort of pop-on connectors like this, which is quite strange. I've never actually seen something like that on a PCB before, but yep, that's how the battery connects. And then over here we have our control board with these buttons, which are a real pain in the backside to press. You have to poke something in to press them. It's kind of awkward. Replacing the battery is pretty easy. Just unscrew the bracket, pull off these connectors, put your battery in, put the connectors back on, and it's simple, very easy to replace. And after a few years you will have to do that. And of course we just have our power wires coming out from the LEDs themselves. So not much to see, pretty basic inside, not much to go wrong, which is good. And a pretty hefty battery, which should keep us going for a long time. One thing I'm happy to see is the strain relief on the AC wire. Even if you tug this really hard, there's no way that's going to come out. So that's a safety consideration, and I like that. So let's put this thing back together and see how much power it consumes. Now, one thing to remember with these emergency lights is that even when the battery is fully charged, they're still going to consume power. So you can see right now it's consuming around 6 watts, and that's the same with other things. For instance, a UPS you might use for your computer, they generally consume around 10 watts even when the battery is fully charged. So this emergency light is consuming 6 watts even when the battery is charged. When the battery is being charged, it probably consumes more power. Now that's not so impressive, because I reviewed a Next LED emergency light just recently, and that only consumed around 2.5 watts when the battery is charged. So 6 watts seems a little bit high. Now of course you're going to want to see a demo, so here's the room with the light off, and then if I turn it on, now you can see. Now this is hard to capture on camera because the camera tries to adjust for the amount of light it has. Now in this picture on my camera it looks like the light is fairly well distributed, but in fact it's not. They really are like spotlights. If I point the camera down, you'll see this bright spot here, and that's because the bulb really throws the light like a spotlight. It doesn't evenly distribute it, and that really annoys me, because these kind of lights are usually used in kind of small areas. They're not going to be mounted like 100 feet in the air. So I don't understand who this is intended to. Why would you want spotlights as an emergency light? It just doesn't make sense. And when I look at this, I think to myself, are they really 3 watt LEDs? Because I've got 1 watt LEDs that look similar to that. So I think I'm going to open this thing back up and actually take a measurement and see if these really are 3 watt LEDs, because you know what, I don't believe it. So I've removed the battery. Let's measure the voltage when the light is on and it's under load. So the voltage is around 6.2, sorry you can't see that, 6.2 volts. Now I'm gonna swap it so it goes through my multimeter. And I'll turn it on, and we're measuring 1.5 amp. So 1.5 times 6, it's actually over 6 watts. So I stand corrected. They're definitely not 1 watt LEDs, because we're measuring 1.5 amp and it was at 6 volts or over 6 volts. So 6 times 1.5 is actually 9 watts. So when this thing's running, it's consuming 9 watts. Imagine that, LEDs. They don't look like they're 9 watts worth of light, but there you go. So I hope you found that interesting. I have to say that I'm not a big fan of this emergency light. 6 watts is just too much. Unless you've got a really huge hall, it doesn't make sense to have that much light. It's just wasting power, and you have no way of switching one on or one off. So I'm not a big fan of that. The other thing is the buttons, which I mentioned earlier, they kind of suck. But ultimately, it comes down to the actual lights themselves. they're more like spotlights. They don't distribute light to really light an area up well. If you had this in a stairwell, it's not going to light up the whole area. It's just going to have 2 spotlights down on the ground. Of course, some of it will reflect and it will help, but I don't understand why they've done this. It's a clear lens and, you know, one single LED that's pointing pretty much straight out. So they've just created 2 spotlights. Why haven't they put some kind of Fresnel lens or something on the front so that when the LED hits it, it scatters the light? In fact, that might be a good modification for this. I might try that, because honestly, right now, this thing is not much use. I'm really disappointed with the way these lights work. The actual electronics, the battery, the functioning, that's all fine, but the way it spreads the light, it's not very good at all. So if you have any ideas on what I can do to make this better, or if you have any questions about this or other emergency lights, put them in the comment section below and I'll reply to you. And you can find me on Twitter at YTGadgetAddict, where you'll see some behind the scenes stuff and things like that before I put it on YouTube. Thanks for watching.